As we remember the victims, a look at what happens here in Ohio after Newtown.
From the Battelle studio at WOSU at COSI, this is Columbus on the Record. Joining Mike Thompson this week, Laura Bischoff, State House reporter for the Dayton Daily News. Bill Cohen, State House reporter for Ohio Public Radio. Terry Casey, Republican strategist, and Joseph Moss, chairman of the Ohio Hispanic Coalition.
It has been a week since the horrific shootings in Newtown, Connecticut. We now know more facts, not all the facts, but enough to start considering how we can prevent similar tragedies. The mass murder of 26 and 7-year-old children, 6 educators, and the mother of the shooter stunned the world and prompted soul-searching in Connecticut, here in Ohio, and around the country. The debate focused on how we treat the mentally ill, school safety, violence in the media, and of course, gun control. The day before the shootings, Ohio legislatures loosened Ohio's already loose gun laws even further. Despite calls he veto it, Governor Kasich says he will sign the bill.
As we move forward, whatever we do, we don't want to erode the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. I mean, that's important. And I think the bill, which passed overwhelmingly, is a measured approach. And again, as we consider things, we just have to make sure that we get to the very root of this problem, and the root of this problem is very deep, and it's something that we have to study and we have to respond to.
Bill Cohen, the governor, actually signed the bill. Any surprise at the State House that he didn't veto it and say, look, let's put this off for a little while, look at it again in the new session? Any surprise at all that he didn't do that?
I don't think it was a surprise because the governor's been pretty pro-NRA and gun owner rights, even though there was the irony that the legislators had passed this bill one day before the Connecticut shootings, and he was under pressure from a lot of the gun control activists to veto it. But he said no, he's a supporter of the Second Amendment. He thinks people should be allowed to bring concealed weapons into the State House garage. Of course, the bill says they have to be kept locked in their cars, but that's his stand.
And people forget that John Kasich, when he was a congressman in the early 90s, voted for the assault gun ban. It later lapsed, but in the 2010 campaign, Ted Strickland viciously attacked Kasich over that vote and saying he was weak on gun rights. So John Kasich, I think, in saying we got to look at the root cause is part of the thing that's important.
I think everybody bears some responsibility here. Terry's absolutely right. As a matter of fact, Kasich's rating by the NRA was lower than Strickland's rating when they were each in the House of Representatives.
But in general, he's basically, ever since that when he voted for the assault weapons ban, since then he's been pretty pro-gun owner rights. But the interesting thing I find is that, as you saw in that clip there, he doesn't want to get involved in the big arguments. He doesn't repeat the basic logic of the NRA position, which is, look, people should be able to defend themselves against criminals, and if they can do it in their homes and walking down the street, they should be able to do it in the State House parking garage or any place else. He just avoids that by saying, well, I'm just for the Second Amendment. So I find that interesting. He does that on a lot of the moral and social issues. He just wants to deal with money issues, doesn't want to really get involved in big debate over gun control.
Laura, Rob Portman, who voted against the assault weapons ban, said, maybe we got to look at these now, the high capacity magazines and clips and guns. Are Republicans in Ohio at the State House perhaps starting to soften a bit, or at least look at it a little differently after the shooting?
I think that they do look at it a little bit differently. I think they're a little more careful about it. I don't see that we're going to have much gun control movement on gun control in the Ohio State House. As Bill pointed out, the governor just signed the expansion of CCW. Since we passed CCW in 2004, it's been a concealed weapons permit program. It's been very popular. I think about 300,000 people have permits to carry concealed weapons now, and the legislature over the years have slowly expanded and expanded. Cities no longer have the right to put in their own gun rules, home rule cities. We have the right to carry concealed weapons in bars and restaurants, places with liquor permits now. So there's an expansion. Maybe what we might see is that expansion kind of is arrested for a little bit before things calm down and they.
Let's take a look at the gun
Once
that was
more.
used in the shooting. One of the guns that was used in the shooting, the Bushmaster assault rifle. There's a picture of it there that the shooter in Connecticut used. It's not an automatic weapon, but it's a semi-automatic, a large capacity magazine. Terry Casey, do we see the assault weapons ban that would ban that kind of gun being put back in place?
Well, one of the problems was when they did it for 10 years, there wasn't any real solid proof. You could argue about it, whether it had that much effect. Plus, I think there was a detailed New York Times story this week that went into the problems in the way the law was written, the technicalities, what's a magazine. And in some ways, if somebody's shooting at you and they've got a cartridge with 10 bullets in, or they got 33, if you're getting one of the first 2 or 3 bullets, it doesn't matter. But there's been arguments about the technicalities, and that's part of the challenge. Now, if you talk to some serious hunters, they'll tell you they would prefer to shoot with an action bolt because it's more accurate. So there's debate among hunters and sports people of which is the best kind of gun and why.
I've seen polls where they say most hunters say we don't need these. We need, we want our rifles, we want our shotguns. One hunter I heard on public radio today saying, I only take 3 bullets with me when I go hunting.
Right.
He said there's no reason to have this type of gun.
That's right, because the narrative is really beyond that of gun control, and it has to do with, I think, a cultural identity that attaches itself to these kinds of weapons. And it's social and it's political in nature. It's not just about hunting. It's not even just about shooting. It's about something else.
Well,
it's an expanded
the Second
narrative.
Amendment doesn't say, you have the right to bear arms only for hunting. It doesn't say it only for collecting. I mean, so I think you're right. It's much more part of our culture, and it's a much broader interpretation.
That's right, but neither does the Second Amendment say that we should have unfettered access to every type of weaponry. And the more recent decision, the controlling decision here from the Supreme Court in 2008, did leave the door open for some degree of control or modifying the types of weapons that can be regulated by the government. Because this is not about gun control. This is about assault weapon and large capacity.
That's the bottom line. No matter what kind of gun you have, it can kill someone. Is there any way to have a balance? Is there any way to have gun control and have that? Because you're going to have, unless you eliminate guns, you're going to have gun violence, correct?
But I would argue part of it might be about the gun, but it's more about the person who has the gun in their hand and what's in their heart and what's in their head, because I think the real problem is not necessarily the gun, because we haven't had, to I know of, big problems with people with concealed carry. It's people that have mental illness problems, people that have other issues, and in some cases they steal, like happened here, steal guns from the mother who had lawfully bought those guns in Connecticut.
But this gun killed 26 people, and they say about 4 minutes. That's not your average gun. That's a little different than. I mean, mental illness was a factor, but the capacity of this weapon to kill was immense.
Any gun can kill 1 person or 2 people, but I think what the narrative is developing right now is how can we prevent the massacres. And I think that is an appropriate argument to have at this moment, and one that the nation can take on.
And for people on the gun control side, I mean, they're very passionate about it, and they can't see why anybody needs these kinds of weapons. But I found the Gallup poll really interesting. Just days after the school shootings, they asked people, what do you think are the most effective ways to stop mass school shootings? And banning sales of assault weapons came in third, and 42%. I'm sure that 42% is very vehement, but I found that surprising that it was that much below 50%.
Even if we banned assault rifles right now, there are so many that are already out there, and I think Dianne Feinstein's bill that she's introduced, or says she's going to introduce, would have exemption, would grandfather in all the ones that are already out there, and would have some 900 exemptions for various tweakings of this kind. So it's not. I mean, the assault weapon ban isn't necessarily very effective.
Let's get to our next part of this discussion. The common thread that runs through all of these shootings is mental illness. There's every indication that the shooter in Connecticut had a long history of mental illness, as did shooters in Aurora, Colorado, Tucson, Arizona, at Virginia Tech, and at Columbine High School in Colorado. Laura Bischoff, this is almost as immense a problem as trying to control all of those guns that are on the street. How do you find someone who's mentally ill, and might cause harm to others?
Well, the thing is, it's the NAMI, the National Alliance on the Mentally Ill Ohio chapter, says that they estimate that 2.5 million Ohioans suffer from some mental illness at some point. So that's a very large swath of the population, and probably 1 in 17 adults suffer from a severe mental illness. So it is a really immense problem, and untreated mental illness is extremely costly, not just to the families and the friends, but also to society in general, because you have charity care at hospitals, emergency room visits, jail and prison time. I think at least 12% of the inmates in the state prison system have a serious mental illness.
And one of the problems, I talked earlier this week to County Prosecutor Ron O'Brien, and reminded me one of the biggest cases locally was the I-270 killer. One person was killed, a lot of other people were injured. It was really a terrorizing thing here. That person had been diagnosed. The parents were trying the best they could to control their son, but the difficulty was he wouldn't take his medicine. So in some cases, people are diagnosed, but how do you make sure they stay on their meds?
And that has been my experience with my mentally ill criminal clients as well, that there is a reluctance in a significant number of cases of taking medication that could otherwise control the impulses or whatever it is that's causing the criminality. Let me suggest something, though, Laura. I think that because those are pretty high percentages, the 12%, maybe even higher percentages, but I think the ones that result in a danger to society of these types of crimes is actually much, much, much smaller, so that if we can have early diagnosis and appropriate treatment, then perhaps we can avoid the next massacre like this.
But some of the problems with that is that people don't recognize mental illness as an actual illness, and they don't they ignore the signs. There's a lot of stigma attached to it, to seeking treatment. And when they do go try and find treatment for their kid or for their loved one or whatever, oftentimes there's a shortage of mental health professionals. It's expensive treatment. Sometimes it's not covered. So it's pretty hard to get the appropriate treatment to that segment of people that really need it the most.
At least the mental health issue is something that liberals and conservatives can sit down at a table and discuss. It doesn't beefing up mental health programs doesn't violate any Second Amendment argument from the NRA. Liberals should like it. Conservatives shouldn't be opposed to it. It would seem that would be at least one thing, if we're looking for some common ground to at least start the discussion,
in the
to
abstract,
do it.
Until the funding question.
Well, that's my point. Is it a way to move the issue past gun control? Everybody wants to help those who are ill, but by saying we need to do more for the mentally ill without putting money behind it, without putting action behind it, doesn't that diffuse from the gun control argument?
Well, one of the problems is we've gone through history in America of how much should people be institutionalized, because according to some of the media reports, the mother was getting ready to have him institutionalized. We don't know whether that was the trigger that did it, but we've had debates in our society over the past 50 years of should people with mental illness problems be institutionalized or should they be normalized in our society? And there's still debates and conflicts, because mental illness is not something that's either there or not there. It tends to be in a lot of shades of gray.
Yeah.
I'd like to also point out that just because somebody is mentally ill does not
make
them a criminal or that they're going to commit violent acts, or the vast majority of people with mental illness do not.
That is the danger with this case and other cases, is that it further stigmatizes the mentally ill, where they may not get treatment because they're afraid they'll be labeled as a potential threat or something like that.
In some of these cases, you have, I'm going to say young people because that's the subject of our discussion here, but you have young people that previously have uttered threats, harm to themselves or harm to the family or harm to the society in general. And I think those would be the easy ones. Those would be the ones that you can identify and maybe refer for treatment.
Of course, we go on Facebook and look at some of the things that young people and other people post on Facebook. We might have half the people locked up because people do occasionally get a little carried away with things they utter, whether it's Facebook or otherwise.
But it should be. I mean, there's a big vigilance. After 9/11, there was a vigilance where you were on the lookout for any kind of strange behavior with regards to terrorism. Should there be a vigilance with regards to dangerous mental illness. Can we do that?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily dangerous just to mental illness, but most of these school shootings anyway are students, and they plan everything ahead of time. It's not impulsive acts. Oftentimes they tell somebody else that they're planning this, but that other student doesn't inform an adult. Yeah. So they could do, and this is part of the training that the Attorney General's office is starting to offer to school districts, is more on intervention and observation, and kids who exhibit signs that kind of fit into this profile, that maybe that there needs to be earlier intervention and kind of more prevention efforts.
Let's get to that school safety issue. That is the other area drawing scrutiny in this story. It appears the Connecticut school had a lockdown plan. It ran lockdown drills. It had a locked entrance, but the shooter shot through it, and 20 students and 6 of their educators were killed in a matter of just a few minutes. Terry Casey, can we ever make schools completely safe?
Absolutely not. I mean, the reality that Connecticut school did kind of was a model in terms of their setup and what they had. I mean, one of the examples is your kids go to Dublin schools. My wife works in a couple of the Dublin schools. They have 3 high schools, 4 middle schools, 12 elementary buildings, 14,500 kids. You can't make each one of those a fortress. Especially high schools are very big, have multiple entrances, and even if you fortified the building, some crazy person could be sitting outside in a van shooting at people when they get out of school.
I know in Dublin, part of the last levy paid for schools to have these locked vestibules where you have to get buzzed in. So schools are doing this.
But Terry, you're not saying that should not be addressed or improved or increased or anything like that.
I think you can improve it, but it's not going to be perfect because people can get in the buildings, bad things can happen. I mean, one of the worst things in American history, I think the worst type of this thing was in 1927 in Michigan. I think it was 77 people were killed, and it was an adult who was on the school board with a bomb, not a gun. So, I mean, these sad things do happen and have happened, but you can improve and you can do better, but nothing's going to be perfect.
The NRA on Friday, Mike DeWine suggested it, didn't recommend it, but he kind of let it out there, of arming teachers or having armed guards at every school. Laura, that seems kind of jarring.
I have a kid in middle school and one in high school, and I really, as a parent, I wouldn't want to see that. I don't think it'd be necessarily all that effective. Even if you have an ex-police officer, somebody who's got exceptional training, the rest of it, for example, my son goes to Thomas Worthington High School. It's got one of the longest hallways in the whole state. So if the one guy or 2 guys with guns who are on staff, they hear about a shooting, it could be at the other end of the building. And like you said, some of these shootings just take a matter of minutes, and there's carnage everywhere.
I didn't hear the NRA propose teachers being armed, but I did hear them.
They want guards.
I did hear them saying cops, or police. Yeah. Police or retired soldiers or retired police. That was at the NRA news conference, which got a lot of publicity. What I found interesting was the Gallup poll that came out before the NRA news conference, but after the school shootings, and increasing police presence at schools got the highest ranking as very effective to try to prevent shootings at schools, 53% saying that's a good way to go. Now, I'm not saying it is, but, you have to decide whether you're going to do what the polls tell you. But at the moment, that's where people are at, even after the school shootings.
But I don't think that the problem is that the NRA is advancing this as the exclusive solution to the problem. This may very well be one of 4 different areas that may have to be addressed by either the community or through legislation or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad offer. It's a bad suggestion. It's just part.
And look at where we are. We're at COSI. Should we have armed guards here? There are lots of kids here, easy open access to the public. Do we have to have armed guards at museums, they mentioned they have them at ball games and at public buildings, but...
Well, or even the State House has security people around, but you don't have to go through metal detectors, and there's something about institutions in our society being open and accessible, and you've got to strike the right balance. But a lot of high schools in Central Ohio, they call them resource officers, but they are police officers that serve a variety of functions, including drug education. So we've got some of it, but I think it's rather impractical to think you could do it in every building, including every elementary, every middle school in Ohio or other states.
Metal detectors at schools has been a proposal in the hopper in the legislature. There's one legislator for a couple of years been pushing the idea of, well, let's see if we can get the feds to give us Homeland Security money, and we'll have the state get that money and dole it out to schools that want metal detectors. Hasn't gone anywhere.
Yeah, but think about this. If you put in metal detectors in every school, right, well, then how do you know that the shooting's not going to happen at recess? I mean, it's
true.
We're trying to.
You can only try.
Yeah. Let's get to our last topic. The media may share some of the responsibility in all this. Violent movies, violent TV shows. There are more of these shows and movies. Kids are watching them at an earlier age, thanks partly to on-demand technology. And then there are the video games, like the big new one this Christmas season, Halo 4. Here's a sample.
Scouts, hold up. They spotted us.
That's enough. Kids love these, Joe. They've been blamed for this. Does that type of thing desensitize potential shooters where they're more apt to do it?
Apparently so. What I've been reading tends to suggest that it's not media, it's the culture in general. We haven't talked about this yet, but oftentimes the topic of the brutalizing of the society and of women through heavy metal and some of the words in heavy metal and rap music. We have certainly the popular movies that oftentimes glorify the killing of human beings or the brutalizing of people. So it's part of the larger topic that we need to discuss.
And one of the things, if you go like we did last Saturday night to see the new James Bond film, which I loved very much, but it's the previews, and you see the targeting of the movies mainly to 16-year-old males, and the shoot 'em up, the blow 'em up. It's pretty frightening and pretty scary. And in fact, Mike Miller, former prosecutor, mentioned he likes to get about 20 minutes late to when the movie's supposed to start so he can skip all the previews, which are pretty gory.
You can jawbone Hollywood and TV executives, and maybe you can have some influence there. But, once you get into the issue of actually having government say, you can't show this, you can't show that, well, you just run into a free speech issue that is tough to get through the courts.
Laura, the ratings, they've tried to tighten up the ratings on these video games. That video game we saw there, you're supposed to be an adult before you buy that.
Right.
Doesn't work.
Actually, I think at GameStop, if my son goes to try to buy that, he has to get somebody to sign off. But not every store does that. You can kids, as if they look like they're older than 9 or so, they can get a store to sell them that.
And the parents can go in and buy it and just hand it over to them right then and there.
Right.
But the video games, it's part of the thrill of the kill. It isn't like the olden days when we were much younger and it was just cops and robbers in the neighborhood. I mean, when you've got right on the video screen with the intensity and quality you have of people being shot, the blood, the dying, it does desensitize.
But these games are available in other countries and they don't have nearly the problems that we have here. Kids in England are playing these games, and they're not shooting up schools as often as we are here.
Well, and that's the thing, because I don't have access to the guns, but it's my understanding that there is plenty of violence. The violence just it's not expressed by means of the tool at hand that we have here.
But part of it, America does have a history of, and one of the ironies is out of Connecticut is where they perfected mass production of guns, whether it's the Colt 45, the Smith & Wesson. Right, yeah. So out of that state, they produced the guns that in a way won the West, but America does have a different culture in terms of what happened here.
All right, it's time now for our final off-the-record comments, predictions. Joe Mass, we'll start with you.
I'm concerned about this, obviously, and I'm concerned as to how will be translated as any type of an effort passes through Congress, particularly through the lens of the safe congressional districts, because I think we're going to continue to be polarized, and unfortunately, I think we're going to see a preview of this with the failure of the talks on the fiscal cliff.
Terry.
I'm going to change subject to something a little more positive. The good news is today, Ohio's unemployment rate went down to 6.8%. We're a full percentage point below the nation. I think that's good and encouraging because one of the best things for mental illness and families is more people having jobs.
The Kasich-Obama recovery
And
continues.
and more tax revenue to fund programs.
Bill.
Republicans are going to continue to dominate Ohio government in the next 2 years. So let me predict Ohio will not move in a direction that would be the opposite of what the NRA and the gun owners want. We might tinker with mental health programs. We might do some jawboning on TV violence, but we're not going to put new limits on gun owners.
Laura.
I kind of agree. I think that there's no single fix to this problem. I do think that here's my prediction: the Ohio Police Officers Training Academy, OPATA, they have a new kind of menu of classes. One of them includes what educators can do to minimize the threat and maximize survival. They said already that their phone is ringing off the hook, and I think the demand for that class is probably going to be pretty exceptional for a long time coming.
Okay. On Friday, I had the opportunity to speak at the Pickaway Correctional Institute at their OASIS program, which is a program for inmates who are on the right track to get their lives straightened out. And I asked them what they would do, and they basically said, treat mental illness, limit video games and bad lyrics and music, and bottom line, be more spiritual and pay attention to loved ones and think more deeply about their community. So that's what they said. Same thing here. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Please check us out online. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. You can connect to all of that at our website, WOSU.org. We leave you this week with the observance at the OSU campus where the bells tolled 26 times for the 26 lives lost in Newtown, Connecticut. Have a good week.